Hello, and welcome to another episode of Tech Done Different. I'm your host today, Ben Schmerler. With me is Wayne Haber, the Director of Engineering with GitLab. Wayne, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, we're really happy to chat with you today. Since you're new to the show, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about what you do and what your goals are, your day to day.
So I'm a director of engineering at GitLab, which you mentioned, and my role is leading a number of engineering teams that do a portion of the GitLab product and service. So currently, that's the secure stages, which scan customers' code and more for security vulnerabilities, so they can make things more secure. The govern stage, which does more of the compliance side and the policy side. Also, anti-abuse to detect and prevent abuse of GitLab, both self-hosted and .com hosted for .com hosted customers. And also a bit with machine learning and our code suggestions feature, which is currently in beta and very exciting. And also growth, which does growth hacking to increase revenue. The team's about 80 people currently and
Wow.
spread, just like many GitLab teams, spread across the world.
Yeah. I one of the things I noticed when I was doing a little homework on you is like you really advocate remote work. I mean, I guess with this type of stuff, you really have to have people working remotely. Are there some strategies you employ to make it effective? I know for some people the remote work thing can be a touchy subject, but I mean, I know in the field we're in, the field you're in, it's a necessity, and so we have to do it effectively. Well, what do you do to make that work well?
It, what what I do and what GitLab does in general is is to rely on asynchronous communication to start. So you don't want to assume that you can get everybody in a meeting, or
Yeah.
that even if you can, that everybody wants to be in a meeting. It's actually much more inclusive to let people collaborate asynchronously, whether that's in Slack or we use our own product, we dogfood our own product in GitLab issues and merge requests, etc. And if we do have a meeting, which we do have meetings, I think I have about 4 hours of meetings a day, which is great. It's much lower than in previous jobs. We have a we don't have meetings without an agenda. We never review slides or a document in a meeting. Never, although almost never. The slides are reviewed in advance, and sometimes people actually record videos in advance. The meeting is about discussing them, and people take notes in advance, and you don't need to attend the meeting to even have the discussion. If you put notes in the meeting agenda, we'll read them out loud and then respond and
That's
take
really
good
cool.
notes and record
Yeah.
almost all meetings. So those who couldn't attend can watch the recording, which lets people get body language and tone in addition to the notes.
That's really cool. You talked about the asynchronous stuff. I think one of the things, I guess one of the hazards of having a mobile phone and a tablet and a laptop and Slack and all this other stuff, all these powerful tools or whatever you're using, is that people have this anxiety about expectations that, oh, they're going to get back to me right away, or that I sent this message 15 minutes ago. Why don't I have an answer on this? Like our expectations are out of whack. And I know when I was growing up, and for you too, it was like sometimes you'd call and leave someone a message on their answering machine, and it's like, yeah, it might take them a day or two to get back to you, but the expectation now is so different. But I'm glad you stressed that asynchronous stuff.
It really helps. And like I'm not on call currently. When I have PagerDuty on my phone. It is the only work app I have on my phone. I don't have email, Slack, or anything else on my phone, and it makes for a nice work-life separation. If somebody needs to get a hold of me, they know how to text me.
Yeah.
And in 4 years at GitLab, I think it's happened once, which is quite nice.
That is nice. Maybe I need to take a tip from that. I know sometimes I'm checking my Slack maybe a little bit too much, especially when I take time off. Real quick, I do want to talk about some of the security stuff. That's an interest to me. How big are these, I guess, people who are abusing GitLab, maybe spammers or crypto miners? I mean, how within, and certainly be careful. Don't tell me anything you don't want to say, but how prevalent is that stuff, and how big of a focus is that for your group?
It's definitely key because we have people can spam us both to get people to click on links for phishing and other things, or just to do search engine optimization, incoming links, etc. And also anybody who has CPU for free as a potential target for crypto mining. And nice thing is we also collaborate with other similar companies, including competitors, of cross-company takedown requests when the attackers partially host their attacks on multiple vendors, which they do on purpose to make it harder to
Sure.
detect. And it is a real challenge. We keep track of it for reputation, for our reputation, for our customers' reputation, and then also to make sure we don't have, slowdowns in incidents due to crypto mining, and also costs, both people costs and compute costs. And the primary concern is more the people, our trust and safety team, which handles the addressing the abuse. We want to give them really good tools so they're not doing the easy stuff manually all the time. They only do the investigations, and the automation handles the easy stuff.
Oh, that's cool. I mean, I imagine you have to change these strategies and take different approaches. I'm just like anything else. The bad guys are evolving as you do. So
They are, and they are. It's easy to think, oh, the bad actors are not smart because they're doing bad things. It's not true at all. They're often extremely smart and dedicated. Not all of them, but many of them, and just as smart or smarter than the protectors are. So you have to keep that in mind, and also their motivations. Like, why would somebody do crypto mining to make maybe hundreds of dollars US? Why put all that time and effort to find ways around the controls of us or GitHub
yeah.
or Docker or Atlassian or whatever? And it's because we think in the US we have this bias of, oh, well, that's not worth my time. But it may be worth somebody's time who that's a lot of money to them. So you have to
Yeah.
think with that in mind that it makes financial sense for them to do so.
Yeah. Sometimes we find that, and I guess this is common in the space of hackers and stuff like that. Sometimes people just want to see that they can do it. It's not even so much the payoff is the win. It's not even so much the cash or something behind it.
Yeah, we've seen evidence of that as well. And there's the other aspect. We haven't done this, but consider it as nudge the attackers or the abusers to participate in our bug bounty program. I mean, don't tell us, of course, that you are doing the other stuff first, but we pay people to tell us about security issues you find in our
Sure.
stuff. And I think those programs are wildly successful when companies can do them.
Yeah, you're almost harnessing the energy of ne'er-do-wells in a positive way, which I think is super cool. So obviously, you're not doing all this stuff by yourself. I mean, you mentioned you have a team, pretty big team, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but I am at with all these meetings, you're focused less on personally on production and probably more on leading and coaching. Is that right?
Yeah, my focus is primarily about influencing people and understanding uh, the why on things and communicating that well, and also understanding the scope and the influencing factors on things, whether it's people I talk to, other parts of the company, customers, people such as yourself, Ben, from your perspective, and bring that in, and the reading I do to keep things in context and always explaining the why. That's always key, the why on things, and really listening with people's feedback and their insight to understand their perspective. I learned so much from everyone else, and I often see myself as a conduit to help them succeed. I'm surely not the smartest person in any meeting or discussion. But I like facilitating the discussions.
You have so much humility, and honestly, it really does impress me when I was looking at your blog, your LinkedIn. You talked a lot about something, servant leadership, which I know is a little buzzwordy these days. But I feel like you really walk the walk instead of just talking about it. Just an experience I had. So you and I had a conversation yesterday, totally unrelated to the podcast, and you had someone who was shadowing you, and we were chit chatting just about social engineering and phishing and such. And your shadow, I don't want to say his name. I don't know if he give permission to be on the podcast, but he brought up the Barnum effect. And I was looking at your LinkedIn today. You already posted about it and what it meant, and that you learned something. And I guess that's, a lot of people think about leadership as I'm teaching someone, but you look at it a little bit broader. I mean, you have this humility that they're teaching you as well, and that this is a mutually beneficial thing, right?
Yeah, and that's really key is to bring people in and make it a conversation. And I just did the debrief with that shadow a couple minutes ago, and he uh, wrote up a big long, not big long, a really detailed write up on what he learned, and I was like so impressed with what he learned and his impressions and what that reflects on how I do things and how I can do better. And it's one of the things I learned with doing the shadow program. Like I came from a security company that before GitLab, that was everything was super confidential because it needed to be based on the types of projects and work we did. Here, so much of what we do is in public. And a couple years ago, I did the CEO shadow program at GitLab, where you get to shadow Sid Sibrandy, the CEO of GitLab. It was so eye-opening. I learned how he interacts with engineering, how he interacts with finance, marketing, and how open he is, and also how he gets help from the shadows, feedback. Like he did an interview, a podcast interview or similar, and then he asked the shadows. He had two shadows at the time, including myself. How did I do? What can I do better? I'm working on this. I'm working on that. And it was so great. So I wanted to give back and do that myself. And I did it internally at GitLab. And about a year ago, I was able to open it up to people outside the company where they can apply to be a shadow as well, which I had to get approval from legal and a couple other teams, which is a little dicey just to make sure I met their needs. But it's been great. I learned so much from their experiences, and they seem to get a lot out of it as well, which is wonderful.
You show a little vulnerability too. On I looked at your GitLab like about me page, or I hope I'm saying that right. And you were writing things about like, here are some things I'm working on, things that I need to do. I need to watch out for, that you need to hold me to account for. That's not very common. Is it hard for you to do that, or did it become easier over time? I'm just kind of curious about that kind of thing. I think a lot of people worry about not showing enough confidence or something like that to show that kind of vulnerability. But I think it's the opposite. But what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. It's hard to do, and it's still hard. Is to showing vulnerability is a great way to make it easy for other people to be vulnerable and to have really open and honest communication, and it lets them admit what they're not great at. You don't have the syndrome of not wanting to ask the quote unquote dumb questions. Those quote dumb questions are great to ask to really facilitate understanding and not have shame or imposter syndrome when learning new things and getting involved in things. And I make it a point to be vulnerable on things like I'm in Zoom all day long, well, at least 4 hours or so a day. I use the word so and too often. I also have a tendency to ramble. You don't want to talk for more than a minute straight without yielding the floor to others to get their feedback so they can internalize things, et cetera. And I'm lousy at those things, but I'm aware. That's the first step. And it really helped to admit those things. It really helps. Like one of, not the most recent shadow, but a previous shadow told me that they have ADHD, for example,
Mm.
and how that challenges them. And I thought, well, I had no idea. And I told them that, like, I had no idea you had challenges with this. What can I do better in those kind of situations? But I don't think they would have brought that up with me if I didn't tell them the challenges that I had.
Yeah, it's easy to be open with somebody when they're open with you. It really lowers that barrier. So obviously maybe you had a couple hurdles doing this like mentorship program, just getting legal approving and all this other stuff. Were there's like some bumps along the way? I'm sure the process for this has evolved over time. Like if I let's say I had a person, let's just call him Ren Perler, and a friend of mine, not me, but a friend of mine who wanted to be a better mentor to some of his colleagues. What are some things to look out for? Maybe potential pratfalls or ways to implement this successfully. Maybe things that not me, that this person could learn.
But I'd say I've learned this through being a mentee, getting mentoring from others, and mentoring inside companies and also outside. So I also do some mentoring with Plato HQ, which I've learned a lot from mentoring other engineering leaders, and also Mentoring Club. Mentoring Club is also free for anyone to be a mentor or mentee. So I've met a lot of people through that as well. It is it's easy to jump to recommendations
Mm-hmm.
when mentoring someone. Don't listen first. listen a lot, talk 10% of the time in
Yeah.
mentoring discussions, and ask them often why. Well, I'm having a problem with meeting this deadline, and I'm really worried about it. Well, why? Like, and you can go into like, is it really a deadline, or what's the importance? And it really helps to do that, to really understand their perspective and ask them a lot of questions before making recommendations. And I would say also is again, be vulnerable. When the more vulnerable you are, the more vulnerable people will be with you, and you can have those real conversations. And that's really important in mentoring as well.
Yeah. It's almost like you can steal this line from me if you want. It's almost like if you want to find vulnerabilities in your products, you have to be vulnerable yourself. Well, that's really cool. I really like that. I want to key in on another thing. So you are a voracious reader. I saw your line was, and I loved this, that you're like the Joey Chestnut of books. So two-part question. First, when you're about to read a book, and if you want to get through it quickly, do you dunk it in water first before you consume it, or you just get right into it? No, that's not a real question. My actual question is, do you have any like favorites? And I guess I would put this in a couple perspectives. Maybe a book that somebody who is learning to be mentored can maybe use effectively, something, maybe they're getting out of school and they're getting into this thing and they want to be able to take mentorship well. Is there a good book that someone should read for that? And then also on the opposite end, someone who maybe is a little bit mature, has been into mentoring for a while, something that could really hone their skills. Any recommendations or favorites?
Great question. I don't no books relating to mentoring really come to mind initially. I'd say most of the mentoring I do is in the engineering with engineering folks,
Mm-hmm.
is starting with one that's not engineering specific, but uh, the Simon Sinek book about start with the why. I believe he's the author of that.
Yeah.
And then also specific to engineering, the Phoenix Project is such a great book. Oh, the other's five dysfunctions of a team, the five dysfunctions of a team book. So those are more understanding people interactions, less about mentoring, but more about the people interactions. What I'd say is to be a good mentor is to start out as a mentee and then mentor others. The nonprofit, the Mentoring Club, is a great place to start. Sometimes I'll talk to senior engineering leaders at companies larger than GitLab, and sometimes I'll talk to somebody who's just out of school or somebody who's just learning IT and wants to get a job in IT. And it's a great combination. Just really listen to people and think about how you would their perspective and how you would respond. So it's really getting practice at it and being open to giving them feedback.
Well, this whole process, every way you make it sound, it's almost like therapy. It's really like listening to people, understanding what their needs are, understanding what's really going on inside so that whatever you're coaching them with is really something that aligns with their direct needs, not maybe not what you perceive inside as what they need, but something that's going to speak to them.
You're the second person to say that to me this week, that people leadership and mentoring could benefit from a psychology degree. I, I, I don't have one, but I started in computer science. But the more you learn about that, the better.
It also probably makes you a more effective engineer. A lot of very bright people are very good technically, but they maybe don't think about that human element. Just because it seems good to you doesn't necessarily mean that somebody who you're creating something for is going to see it the same way.
Yeah, and they don't know what you know. They don't know what you know, or they may not agree with the facts. It's always bring the data to convince. So you may feel really confident that doing X or Y or Z will be very effective. Bring the data to show how you made that decision. And when you do that, you may change your mind.
Yeah.
Like, how do you justify it to others are really key. Like, going back to security, a couple of years ago, I led a project at GitLab to reduce crypto mining, and this is all public, so I can talk about it. Is we put in a change to require a credit card to be validated, not charged, but validated before you can use GitLab hosted CPU to run
Mm-hmm.
continuous integration jobs, CI jobs. Well, crypto miners can not do CI with those; they can do crypto mining. So it was I had to bring the data on why that would be successful, what the negatives would be. There were some negatives. There are users that don't have credit cards or don't want to provide them to us. In some parts of the world, and other demographics, it's a real challenge. We needed it, and we put this change out in production and rolled it out and got feedback, and some of it was really negative, some of it was really positive. Like, don't blame GitLab for this change. Blame the bad actors that make GitLab and other companies do this. Nice thing about this is we now brought the data again, going forward a couple of years, of we can actually we want to optimize this, and we're working on some changes now to make it so that if you don't have a credit card, you can still use these features, but still verify a bit of who you are. So we can not lock out legitimate users, but also prevent a lot of the abuse, which is great.
That's really cool. It sounds like mentoring never really ends. It sounds like the coaching never really ends, or development never really ends. It's always just a constant process. It's a discipline, really. So
The other, I would agree. The other key thing to do is 360 reviews, in which is related to mentoring, is meaning getting anonymous feedback from stakeholders and peers, which is really scary. Like, I do them periodically, at least once a year, and I read them like, oh my gosh, I was worried about X. And you know what? Nobody's saying that, but I have a blind spot over here.
yeah.
And people are really annoyed with me. And but nobody said it to me direct, but they gave it to me in anonymous feedback. So there are various systems you can use to do that. You don't need to use any of them. At GitLab, we use, I think, Culture Amp, which is just fine. I've also used just an anonymous Google form with 3 questions. What should I start doing? What should I stop doing? What should I continue doing? And make it anonymous feedback. If you do that, it opens you up so you're vulnerable, and it gets you a lot of things where you may not be aware of, some blind spots, where you may be worried about some things you don't need to worry about. And it's painful. It's a painful process, but it's painful in a good way, as people are willing to give you feedback on what you need to improve upon, and that they wouldn't give you directly, perhaps. And doesn't mean you need to index on all feedback, of course. You may not agree. You have to take it in stride, but I take those things very seriously. And I recommend it to everybody, whether you're a people leader or an engineer or otherwise.
That's really cool. Really love hearing that. Just hearing you talk about this stuff really gives me a lot of confidence in you and your team, and being effective. I mean, when you have effective management, you can really make things happen and really get the most out of people, and out of your goals. But before we wrap up, I wanted to I always like to ask, what's something, one key takeaways, one thing that our listeners can do if they either want to be a better director of engineering, or a better mentor, or a better leader, or whatever. What's one thing? Where should they start?
I would say is it's easy to jump into the details. But if you start doing that, you're doing more managing than leading. And it's give people, whether you're managing managers of managers, or or direct or individual contributors, is give them the guardrails. Tell them what they should stay inside of, and then let them figure it out, and give them feedback, and both directly and indirectly, based on getting feedback on what they're doing from your stakeholders. But let them figure it out. They are in the details and you're not, and they will likely come up with really creative and interesting ideas that you never thought of. So lead, don't manage.
That's awesome. Wayne, thank you so much for joining us. Before we wrap up, tell the audience, where can people find you? I'm sure they're going to want to learn more. Maybe they want to be better mentors, or want to work with GitLab or something. How could they find you?
Absolutely. What you can do is Google waynehaber.com, a little blog there, and you can find links there to my LinkedIn, also to Mentoring Club, which again is that nonprofit I mentioned, where you can book time with me if you just want to talk and catch up. And that's where you can see my GitLab README and other info about GitLab as well.
That's great. Wayne, thanks again for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy person, and again, we learned a lot, and I really appreciated the chat. So thanks again.
Thanks, Ben.
If you'd like to learn more about the podcast, you can go to tedharrington.com/podcast. Thanks a lot, everybody, and have a great day.